and it also um, in working in tandem with the RFRA set some really interesting precedent. Uh, so that uh, it gave um, uh, religious organizations a platform for securing their religious rights, even if their actions flew in the face of existing law. So in our case, that means suing the DEA for an exemption, and is in the same way that Santo Daime and Una de Vegetal sued the DEA for an exemption, and uh, the in order to practice. And so what the DEA has to do then is to establish the least restrictive means for essentially regulating churches. It can't be a total prohibition. Um, that is that's a matter of case law at this point. Now, how do they establish that exemption process? What they, in fact, what the DEA did was to uh, at least in in name, set up an exemption process online. And then you could apply as a church, you could apply for an exemption. And set up those exemptions following the Una de Vegetal and Santo Daime case. The problem was that no one had actually ever got an exemption. They never issued an exemption, and they never would issue an exemption. So our attorney came to me at one point. He said, Scott, you can't file for an exemption. If you do, then you're agreeing not to drink ayahuasca, serve it to anybody until the DEA has determined that you are in fact an ayahuasca church, and they issue an exemption. And if you do, then you're in violation of this or that. You're actually, and because you're signing this document, you're liable for perjury. And so he's like, I think you need to sue the DEA. And my first response was, balls. I'm like, Charles, who sues the DEA? Honestly, I'm like, it's not that I disagree. It's just that I'm going to need a couple days on this one. And so then the next day I called him up. I said, okay, let's do it. We've got to. There was no alternative. And there were plenty of people at that time who were saying, don't rock the boat. They may not, file for an exemption, just do it, engage in administrative exhaustion. And after looking at it, Charles, myself, and people in our team realized there was no way to avoid it. Sooner or later they'd be coming around, and they would just kind of pick us off. And what we were simply doing was engaging in our free right to exercise, a right to free exercise of our religious practice. Very simple. But that flew in the face of the scheduling program under the Controlled Substances Act, and so the DEAs needed to step in. Now, at one point, they came to us and said, "Okay, we're willing to do a settlement." I'm like, okay, that sounds good. And we stepped through that process, and we realized that they were running it more like an investigation, and there weren't sufficient guardrails, protections for people. So we had to had to step out of the settlement process, and that found us back in federal court where we are today. But again, for our church, for other churches, given this like deep background for the in history in the U.S. for free practice, for practice of religion under the First Amendment, RFRA, separation of church and state. It's not only like codified in our constitutional law, in congressional statute, in case law, all sorts of case law. We found some really fascinating case law.